Hi, I'm Bob, the developer of Harvest Island. I'm a physicist that went into game design, and I want to share a piece of my game development experience when I first came up with Harvest Island. I've been working on Harvest Island for 2.5 years, but I want to share my thoughts on how Harvest Island came to be. I'll show you what I was thinking when I was making Harvest Island and some of the challenges I had to face to make this game a reality. So stick around, my thought process might intrigue you. This began back in April 2020. The only thing I had was $250. Not a lot to work with to make a quality game. But that's not my first problem. My first problem was that I had no idea what I wanted to make. So I thought about my skills as a developer. I knew that I was a moderately experienced game developer that made a few games in RPG Maker. I made Second Chance, which is a game about a hero surviving the perils of being in debt. It was a comedic game that was my first game I ever made. I learned a lot in making that game and picked up a few skills in doing so. How games work, the tools I use to make games, and most importantly, how to design games. That game was a flop, but the experience I learned was great. My second game I made was The Beast Named Eliza, which is an inspired fairy tale of a girl lost in the woods that's trying to find her memories. This game went well and had thousands of eyes on me, so I knew that things I learned from my first game showed in my second game. The third game I made was The Chains That Bound Me, which is a horror-inspired steampunk fantasy RPG game. I spent a year working on this and learned what it took to make games on a larger scale, and not something that can be played in 30 minutes. The amount of time and effort was insane, so I dropped the project and left the game as a to be continued since it required a large amount of money to finish the game. During that time, I've learned how to draw pixel art and create my own custom environment, which is something very important in game development to save money. The game never got the attention since it was considered an incomplete project, but the skills I picked up from creating a bigger game was valuable. My fourth game was Emily, which is a Portal-inspired walking simulator horror game. It didn't go as great as The Beast Named Eliza, but it was a very good short game, and I was getting more confident in my abilities in my game development. Designing games took 1 to 2 months for a 30-minute game instead of a full-blown 6 months when I was still learning on how to develop games. So my skills were improving and I knew how to scale back on a game and release it. I made another game called Emma Survival, which is a sequel to Emily, and this was the time when my skills peaked. I felt more comfortable designing larger games since I knew how games were designed and how much work I needed to put into them to make them great to play. My plan was to make a lot of games, a lot of small games, and build up a fan base. 12 games a year, bug-free and highly enjoyable. 1 game a month. So thinking about all of my game development experience, I had to answer the question, what kind of game am I going to make with a $250 budget? I'm going to make a game that has over 10 hours of gameplay. But why? We went through all of this thought process and it made sense to make short games and slowly build a fan base. It wouldn't take that long to make games. Well, the reason is, I wouldn't be growing fast enough. I made 4 short games in the course of 3 years, and in total, my follower count was about 100. That included my Twitter and my YouTube combined. So even if I did make 12 games, it wouldn't amount to much, and the struggle would just be harder because I would have to make new environmental art assets for each new game. And marketing short games is impossible because they would be sold for $1 or $2. It wouldn't be worth the time and effort to do this commercially. Most game developers would advise to make a lot of short games, and the reason they give that advice is so that new developers can learn and make mistakes before making a bigger game. I'm at the stage right now where I'm realizing that bigger budget games can make more money and attract bigger fans. It makes sense in a business perspective because selling 1,000 copies for $1 versus selling 1,000 copies for $30 is a big difference, and that's 30 times more money. With the bigger game, it'll allow me to continue on and slowly scale my project bigger and bigger. That's why it's better for me to move from small games to moderately larger ones and sell them at a higher price. It's feasible commercially. So now that I know what I want to make, this game has a second problem. A game development with a low budget. How can I make a good game with only $250? I thought about what my strong points were in game design. Only 2 things that I was strong at, music and storytelling. And the things I knew like drawing pixel art and programming can help save me money since these were the skills I picked up while I was developing my other games. Depending on the genre of the game, the budget can vary a lot. If I wanted to make an FPS multiplayer game, I would need millions of dollars, which I couldn't afford. Same goes with an MMORPG, so the bigger the game, the more expensive it gets. Since I wanted a big game and not too big, I thought about making a single player game, and I also thought about what sold better in terms of genre. I researched a few indie games that were successful and found that Stardew Valley had sold over 10 million copies. So there's 10 million fans, and if only 1% of those fan base found my game and liked it, then my game would be considered a success. That's about 100,000 copies sold at the price of maybe $20 to $30. That's life-changing right there. Also, marketing wouldn't be too difficult because gamers are already familiar with the genre of the farming sim. Now the problem is that, is $250 enough to make a good indie game? I went deeper into the developer of Stardew Valley and he has done everything himself. I saved him a lot of money. So $250 wouldn't be too much of an issue to make a 10-hour game since I'm able to do the art, programming, music, and storytelling, everything that a game needs. So I decided to design a farming simulator game. Now I have a third problem with my game development. What makes my game unique for people to play? In other words, what's the hook of my game? Because without a hook, it would be impossible to sell, and it would be like any other indie game trying to make a quick buck. I thought about my audience more. Who would want to play my game? How would my game become popular or get lots of YouTubers to review my game? And my simple answer to that question is that the game needs to tell a compelling story. In a farming genre, the game is designed to focus on growing a family and building your farm from the ground up. I know this because I've played a lot of farming games, and most farming games do this. They focus on the mechanics more than the storytelling. And to survive in selling your indie game, I have to make the game different from the rest of the games for YouTubers and gamers to be interested enough to buy it and play it. So the hook of my game would be telling a compelling story. Now the trick is to make a game with a strong story without a strong game mechanic. And this leads to my fourth problem. Game design without a strong game mechanic. What does that mean? It means that I have to make a farming game without the core farming game mechanics. The farming game can't have the traditional planting crops or the traditional dating and raising a family. So to design this, I need to think of how I can make the game fun while throwing away those traditional farming game mechanics, which makes the game fun. And that's a big challenge. The reason why I had to throw away those core mechanics is because my game is developed in RPG Maker, which isn't designed to be a farming simulator game. It's designed to be an RPG game. That's why it's called RPG Maker. But I'm using RPG Maker because it'll speed up my development process, something I'm willing to trade to get a game out sooner rather than spending another year learning a new engine. Because of that downside, I thought more about what the strong points are in RPG Maker. The dialogue system, where programming a story-driven game is very simple and fluid, and creating cutscenes that doesn't require a heavy knowledge of programming. Basically, RPG Maker is strong in making any exploratory game. So, instead of a farming game with traditional dating and planting crops, I'll be making a farming game with exploratory features and substitute the traditional farming mechanics with discovery and secrets of finding the unknown, an already unique game that provides another solution to my third problem. And this leads to my fifth problem. What is the story going to be about? I had to think about my audience more to answer this question. Who would want to play my game? How would my game become popular or get a lot of YouTubers to review my game? And is my game unique enough that gamers will understand it in a sentence or two? To answer these questions, I had to think about what the assets I have to make this game. I had $250 to work with, and I searched what art assets would work well together without the feel of two artists butting heads with one another, or having that huge art contrast that drastically changes as you play the game. So what I found online was a forest asset pack, a beach asset pack, and a home asset pack that worked well together. But the biggest issue I would face is that storytelling wouldn't be flexible. I had to design a story around the art I'm given. How can I make a story with a limited amount of flexibility? Luckily for me, I'm a strong writer and understand the groundwork in making a compelling story. The only thing I need to make the story work is to come up with an ending before I even write the story. Because when you write the story with no focus or idea, you're undergoing a lot of revision. But when you write the story with an ending in mind, the revision cuts down a lot. This idea is vital to this small budget game because I wouldn't have a lot of room to make revisions. If I did, it would cost me more than my $250 budget. So I spent a couple of days thinking about the ending and working backwards in creating the story. And I came up with an emotional type game with two kids exploring an island, a big brother that wanted to get off the island and explore the world, and a sister that follows the big brother around. The hook of the game would be making you cry. This would answer the bigger question of what my game is going to be about, and more importantly, would YouTubers play if it was told in an emotional way? The answer would be yes. To the Moon uses a similar engine to mine and tells a captivating and emotional story, which sold hundreds of thousands of copies, so my game can do the same thing. And my final problem, the sixth problem, naming my game. Because I knew how my game was going to be planned and how it was going to be designed, and the genre it was going to be, it wasn't too difficult in naming my game. I knew what the hook was going to be, and I knew how the story would be told. So I named the game Harvest Island, a story-driven farming simulator. And that's pretty much my thoughts on how Harvest Island came to be. And this marks the 2.5 years of my development. I'm Yo Bob, the developer of Harvest Island, and thanks for watching.